Hi, today I'm joined by Laurent Mialhe. Laurent's held numerous executive supply chain roles across organizations including Orveon Global, Estee Lauder, Huda Beauty, Shiseido, Coty, and more. Laurent, thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, Sam. Happy to be here with you.
I guess a good place to start. Could you just tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, and a bit about your career?
I started my career about 30 years ago in Procter Gamble in Europe. I spent about 11 years there doing what I would say most of the basic supply chain role, and I think we'll talk about that a bit later. Then I moved to the US about 25 years ago and started to work in a few companies, mostly in the beauty care and luxury area, and moving myself little by little to a chief supply chain officer role on public company and private equity.
Fantastic. And could you tell me, throughout your career, looking back to earlier in your career with Procter and Gamble, and then later in your career as you moved to the US, what was some advice that you were personally given by mentors that you feel helped shape where you got to today in your career?
So I think overall, as I was saying, my first 11 years at P&G have been absolutely fantastic because I've learned the basics. And I think it's really important for somebody who wants to become chief supply chain officer to spend the time to understand really the core process of the supply chain. What are the core process? Of course, it's manufacturing. So I had the chance when I was at P&G to actually work on the production line, run the line myself, and I can still, I think in some cases, operate a few machines on a packing line. That's the first thing. The second thing about learning is to have the chance to work with different culture, diversity, and be able, to have adapted yourself to many culture in the world. Because again, when you're a chief supply chain officer, you handle generally global supply chain and you work really with different profiles. So that's really important. The third point, I think, and we get maybe a bit more in the detail, is that some companies will put the supply chain people in a kind of silo where you are very far away from the commercial teams. That happens a lot, specifically in large corporation. And I think it's important when you make your way up that slowly but surely you become really a friend of your commercial partners and not the guy who is operating a supply chain in a silo or somewhere in an office. So those are really important things, and you need to shape your learning in order to get there.
Brilliant. You mention around partnering with commercial stakeholders and building those relationships. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? What is the way that you've tackled that throughout your career, and what do you think is the best practice for building those
Yeah.
relationships?
So obviously the process that we use, the name we use in supply chain to talk about partnership with commercial is S&OP, Sales and Operation Plan, which is basically how you link the sales plan that your commercial team is trying to put in place with your operational and make sure that they're at sync. So for sure, it's impossible to operate properly in a company without this S&OP process in place. So that's really one. So make sure you have an S&OP process. Make sure that your team and yourself work together with commercials, understanding the demand, understanding the trend, and building your supply chain network and process and production around it. The second thing is very simple. Visit the markets. Go with your commercial peers in the market. Take the time to talk to the retailers. With them, of course, don't do that alone. But it's really important that you go to the market, that you go on the shelf, that you look at your product, and that you understand, talking to your commercial team, what are the challenges they have with their distributors, with their retailers. It's important that you know that. So again, get into their shoes. We call that empathy, but it's really important that you show empathy to your commercial people. When they complain that they don't have the product, it's not for them. It's for their customers. It's for their retailers. And generally, those guys are on them all the day, and you don't want to be in that position.
Absolutely. And I think building those relationships internally, especially earlier on in your career, it can be quite a daunting task to work across different teams, across different stakeholders. And the S&OP process is a pretty common way of doing that. But I like what you said about going and visiting the markets, being hands-on, being able to really relate that back to what you're doing on a supply chain perspective. And yeah, I think that's really valuable advice.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sam.
Sorry, I was going to say around, you mentioned obviously you started your career in Europe, you then moved across to North America, how you found that transition from working in a European role to a North America leadership role. And you mentioned as well being able to work with different nationalities, different stakeholders, diversity within the team.
So that transition moving to the US was certainly the most difficult transition of my career for two reasons. Even if I was speaking English before, because I was working for P&G, I moved from a very structured company, Procter Gamble, into, I would say, a non-structured organization, which was LVMH, where I was missing those corporate functions that are always here to help you, and I had basically to do it completely by myself. I was reporting to a head of finance who was a very good guy, but who didn't know about supply chain. So I had basically to reinvent myself and became suddenly really the head of the organization without any support. On top of that, this is where I started to work with the commercial teams. I was in charge of a kind of supply chain service center working for 7 brands, which means that I had 7 bosses. Okay. And dealing with that was not easy, but I learned so much during that move. The move to the US was also pretty interesting because in the US, I will not say you can do whatever you want, but you have more freedom for entrepreneurial. People are much more open, for example, to investment. The pace of change was faster. So it was really for me a fantastic enabler to my career. Certainly, I must always say the best decision I made in my career was to start at Procter & Gamble, and the second best decision was to move to the US and leave P&G.
No, brilliant. And I think working across different geographies, different cultures can add a lot, especially once, eventually once you're in a global role, having actually had that hands-on experience is really
and to build
valuable.
on that, Sam, I had also a chance to work with a Japanese company at some point. And I remember entering there, and one of the first things they told me is that you need to learn how to work with the Asian culture. So I knew China a lot, I knew Korea, but I didn't know Japan. And honestly, working with the Japanese has been absolutely fantastic, because this is where you see that the change has also to be built on the history, on the culture that they have. You cannot go and say, I want to make a change, I want to invest this equipment. So no, you have to build your case, and you have to explain to them why it's important and why this is going to build a company because of their culture. So it's really important that you understand that.
Fantastic. In terms of supply chain itself, supply chain is transforming a lot. There's a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different focus, a lot of noise in the market about what people should be learning and what people should be developing to be leaders of the future. In your opinion, what do you think that are the most important skills that someone, a supply chain leader of the future should be focusing on and should be developing?
Yeah, this is a very interesting point, and there is a lot of discussion about that. I think the first point, if you want to be a supply chain leader efficient, is to have an end-to-end view. I think you cannot be a chief supply chain officer or be high in the hierarchy on supply chain without understanding what's happening at your raw material suppliers and what's happening on the shelf at the retailers or in the end of the consumer. And you must have this end-to-end view. I'm always giving the example of one day I was operating a subsidiary in Korea from the US, and we were out of stock on one SKU in Korea, and the Korean general manager was totally unhappy about that. And by digging into the why, we understand that the root cause was because a bag of raw material that was used in a factory in the US to make that product did not have the right size. It means that when we were producing, we were never producing enough. So a problem on the shelf was actually due to the size of the raw material bag that we were buying in a factory. So it's an example, but the end-to-end view is absolutely important. Understanding all the different steps, purchasing of components, purchasing of raw material, how to bring them into your factory, how the demand is flowing in the factory, how the factory is shipping to distribution center, how the orders are prepared at the distribution centers, how they are shipped, and more importantly also, what's happening at the retailers, how they are managing that in order to get on the shelf. Of course, I'm talking about consumer goods here. But the end-to-end view is absolutely important. I think in the future, it's also going to be very important to know your product. Whether you produce a lipstick, a luxury bag, or a phone, I think it's fundamental that the new supply chain leader understand how the product is made. Touch it. You cannot be far away of the product anymore. Why that? Because all with the social media things, you are bombarded with information. The consumer now who are looking at your product and making a point. And you want to be able immediately to provide an answer to understand what's going on. So knowing your product is becoming a must more and more for the supply chain heads. What I'm also thinking is, if you want to be successful now in the chief supply chain officer role, is you need to understand that the cycles are getting shorter and shorter. I'm always quoting somebody at Accenture who said one day, the pace of change has never been as slow as today. It means that you need to be ready to go faster. You need to be ready to change, to adapt your supply chain faster, to redesign it, to teach new things to your people. So the success now will come for more velocity in your supply chain, more responsiveness, and the big word is about agility. So be agile yourself and be always ready to rechange your supply chain. Now, we are all talking now about a few tools that are going on the market, like AI. I think it's going to be important now for a supply chain leader to embrace AI. Embracing AI, what does that mean? It doesn't mean only using AI to summarize a meeting or to make a presentation. It's also asking questions like, can we improve the demand using AI? Could we improve the reliability of the production line by having artificial intelligence looking at the past, looking at the data and making recommendations? Could we improve the speed to market? Because we know that launching a product is generally slow because of poor decision process or change of mind all the time. Can AI help us for that? I think this is the beginning of it, but I think it's going to be really, really important. And the last comment I would say, Sam, is become or stay very close to your CEO. If you want to be a successful supply chain leader, do not get into an office in a factory. Make sure your office is at the same floor of your CEO. Make sure you talk to him or her every day, because if not, you are not going to follow the pace. Okay, so a good supply chain leader now, a good chief supply chain officer, must be the right hand of the CEO. Okay, so really important, really, really important. Be physically close to him or her.
Absolutely. I think that's something that pre-COVID, we heard a lot of people were frustrated about, potentially not getting as much exposure as they wanted to the CEO. And I think post-COVID, after we've seen what can go wrong, that has changed for a lot of people. But no, I agree. And I think that's really good advice. I'm keen just to quickly zoom in on the first point you made about that end-to-end view. What would you recommend? What would you say is the best way to develop that end-to-end view as you go through your career? Is that to work throughout some different functions, or is that to try and, academically do an MBA to understand the breadth of business? What would your recommendations be?
I think it's working across different functions. I think if you're a manufacturing guy, there is a point where you need to learn logistics. So I would recommend to you, get to a logistic assignment. When you've done logistic and manufacturing, go to procurement, go to product development. Make sure you handle the quality part of your job. Get into the technical engineering part also. So it's really getting through those assignments through your career, so that, when there is a chief supply chain officer role, people are going to look at your experience and say, oh yeah, that person knows manufacturing. Oh yeah, that person knows logistics. Oh, engineering is a big part of it. So I would really recommend, take the risk to get through different assignments. within your company in order to learn. And when you are in those assignments, as I was saying at the beginning, get to the detail. Okay. Um, you need to be able, if you want to be a good chief supply chain officer, to take the role of a production planner. You need to be able to understand in detail how to calculate a safety stock. Okay, I'm giving that as an example, but this is really important. So I think get to those different positions. You don't have to do all of them, but I think 80% you play the 80-20 rule here and learn through that. I don't think an MBA is really necessary.
Yeah. And I think this is something I discuss with people as they go through their careers. People find themselves segmented. They reach a relatively senior level where they don't want to then pivot and they don't want to learn something new, but it can limit your career if you don't have that end-to-end breadth. And particularly, having worked on a plant or having worked within the head office, having had at least some exposure across various different elements of that. Yeah, I think that adds a lot of value from the people I speak with. I'm curious, in terms of someone who's just starting out their career, someone who is 1 to 2 years, they're ambitious, they want to be a chief supply chain officer one day. What would your advice be to that person? What would your advice be to help them get to that level?
So first, learn your basics. Don't stay superficial. Get to the bottom of your job. Be successful in your job. We will come back to some organization point after, but I think one of my role when I was chief supply chain officer was always to identify, when I was working in factories or in distribution center, the talents, the young guys, young women who were actually learning, were able to explain really well the basics of their job and were making an impact in their role. So make an impact in your role. Don't think already about the big job. Just think that you have to do the things right, and continue to learn that way. The second thing I think which is important is learn. Okay, learn your basics, but go a bit around also. Look at what's going on around you. Okay, start to get the spirit of the end-to-end supply chain. Okay, if you start in a distribution center as a receiving manager, if your reception is going very well, start to see how you can even make an improvement by working on the inbound flow. Can you get the truck on a more regular way? Is there a way to improve the way they've been loaded? Just be curious and learn what is around you. Okay, those are really my advice.
Brilliant. And on the other side of things, if you were speaking to a vice president, someone who's further in their career, who is looking to take that final step to board level, what would your advice be for that person who is senior, who is in a leadership role, but wants to take that final step upwards?
Yeah. So definitely when you get to that level, you need to show executive presence. So what is executive presence? Is the way you behave in a board meeting or in an executive committee meeting, and it's generally shown about the way you listen. Okay, so be the one who is listening the most in the room. Okay, don't go fast. Listen, understand, process the information in your head, and then comes with a recommendation to the team. Be a very, very good listener. That's really my advice to get to a VP, to the other position. Bring ideas to the table, and show to your CEO, to your CFO, to your CMO, whatever, that you understand your supply chain and that you will design a supply chain that will meet their requirement. I'm always saying to people, to chief supply chain officer, it's not your supply chain, it's the supply chain which meets the needs of the brand, which meets the need of the market. Okay, so show that you are ready for that you listen well, and that you're going to build something which is going to match their business need. Again, I'm going to summarize again. You don't build a supply chain to have a shiny supply chain. You build a supply chain who answer the brand growth, which is a platform for growth. So make sure they understand and that you're skilled for that. Okay.
Brilliant. Really, really good advice. And I think especially what you say around that listening piece and being able to work very closely with the business, it ties back to what you say around working closely with the CEO and being able to build those relationships with the board and having that board presence. So yeah, really valuable advice, not just for the junior level, not just for the senior level, but across the board there, I think.
A couple of points on organization, Sam, if I may, because
Please.
one of the aspects of being a chief supply chain officer is the fact that you generally manage big organization. When you are in a company with, I think, your commercial partner who can have a lot of, commercial people around the world, you are generally the person who has the largest organization in the company. So it's important that you build your HR skills. Okay. So what does that mean, HR skills? By being able to recruit, being able to lead, to develop, being able to reward, being able to train. So all of that is really important. So I would really recommend that you spend time with HR, that you have a good HR person, or eventually that you have an assignment within HR. That's really important. Because again, even if it's a small company or a big company, you will have the largest organization. What does that mean also? It means that you need to be able to have a compelling vision for your people. And the compelling vision starts, but I'm not going to give you a leadership training here, but by being very clear about your vision, what the supply chain is, launching the right KPI and managing action plan and strategy properly. But one piece of advice that I would have for you is every time you visit an operation, do not stay into an office. Get on the floor. Do what I'm calling manage by walking around. Okay? Managing an organization is not only sending a PowerPoint or an email, it's managing by walking around. Walk the distribution center. Reward the person when it is cleaned, when somewhere it's well organized. Give advices where you see an opportunity. When you visit a factory, go on the line, spend a few minutes looking at what's going on, and give feedback on the ground. This is what I'm calling managing by walking around. It's really important, and it will give you immediately a good way of delegating and developing your organization.
Brilliant. I think particularly what you say around the HR piece, being a headhunter, I can relate to that probably a little bit more, where I talk to people every day who are either in the market or open to new opportunities, whatever it might be, and being able to really articulate why someone should want to work for an organization. People don't move for a paycheck or for a little bump in whatever it might be in salary or bonus. They move for the job, they move for the company, they move for the career. And I think that's something I've not heard that from anyone before in terms of taking a HR assignment and working that closely with HR. But it's so valuable at every level, because whether it's a chief supply chain officer or someone who's a brand new graduate, being able to articulate that story to them, yeah, that's quite a unique perspective, but a really, really valuable one, I'd say.
A pitfall. So never said that it's because of the demand. It's kind of a joke. But we have the tendency in supply chain to always say, oh, the product is not there because the demand was wrong. My advice would be never say that. Work on the demand. We talked about SNOP at the beginning, but the demand is not going to get better. The question is, how do you increase the agility of your supply chain to meet the demand which is erratic? And here, you will become a very good friend of your commercial partner. That's really important.
And it goes back to building those relationships. I think, being able to have those conversations, work across the organization, and eventually when you become senior enough, building that board presence, everything you said there comes together very nicely. Amazing. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me. Some really valuable advice in there. And really appreciate you taking the time.
Sam, thank you for those questions. And it was a very good discussion. I hope that it will help some of our folks to grow in the organization.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.